I'm Dr. Jomo Mategi. I'm Associate Professor of Science Education here at IUPUI, and I also serve as Director of the Urban Center for the Advancement of STEM Education. We call it UCASE. UCASE was established as a joint effort between the School of Education and the School of Science, and throughout the years we've enjoyed tremendous support also from the School of Engineering and Technology. And the mission of UCASE is to increase the numbers of qualified teachers of mathematics and science. So the overall goal of UCASE is a good impetus for this forum, which is really examining the numbers of African American mathematics and science teachers. Nationally, fewer than 3% of practicing mathematics and science teachers are African American. Here in the state of Indiana, however, fewer than 3% of practicing teachers across all disciplines are African American. And so we know that there are many fewer who specialize in mathematics and science. And so this is the reality that caused us or drove us to establish this forum. In the forum we've titled Just 3%, a panel discussion on the recruitment and retention of African American teachers in STEM. We hope will serve as a starting point for conversation, not only aimed at helping us to understand the problem, but also aimed at helping us to identify solutions that we in our respective positions, whether it's in K-12 education, in administration, in university, can address this issue. Before we begin, I want to recognize a few people and organizations. First, I want to recognize the Student African American Sisterhood, which we call SAS. And the mission of the Student African American Sisterhood is to empower the IUPUI campus and community at large. We should give special thanks to Brandy Jennings, who you may have seen coming in. She's the president of SAS, as well as the entire SAS e-board and several SAS members who will be joining us throughout the forum today. They made a tremendous contribution to this effort and actually gave us the initial idea to do some kind of jointly sponsored forum with the student organization. I also want to recognize the Center for Urban and Multicultural Education, which we call CUME, getting the full IUPUI alphabet soup today. And the work of CUME centers on connecting research, theory, and practice in urban schools while critically challenging stereotypes regarding diverse students, families, and schools. So today's moderator, Dexter Wakefield, is the Education Research Coordinator of CUME. We're also pleased to have with us two students who are recipients of the Carver Teaching Initiative Scholarship. This CTI scholarship is aimed at recruiting, supporting, and retaining minority STEM teachers who made an express commitment to teaching underrepresented minority students. Brianna and Maritza, can you please stand so folks can see or raise your hand? Brianna Starks is a junior elementary education major. Is that right? Her first year here, she was a sophomore, so she did some work when she was in high school. And Maritza Covarrubias is a freshman elementary education major who is a graduate of Ben Davis. Thank you both. So just so that she's not embarrassed, Brianna will be leaving us soon to go to class, but she's going to rejoin us at the reception at Mo's Steakhouse. And if you want to find out more about the Carver Teaching Initiative Scholarship, you can go to our website, which is www.es2rp.org. It's www.es2rp.org. Finally, I want to recognize the Great Lakes Equity Center, which we call GLEC. And the Great Lakes Equity Center is an equity assistance center based in the IUPUI School of Education. The center's mission is to ensure equity in student access to and participation in high-quality research-based education. At this time, I'm going to invite the principal investigator of the Great Lakes Equity Center, Dr. Kathleen King-Torius, to the podium. And while she's coming up, I'll just talk about her a bit. Dr. King-Torius is also an assistant professor of urban special education. Her research examines the ways in which systemic factors converge to shape educational access, participation, and outcomes for students who have been historically marginalized.
I want to welcome everybody here today. It's wonderful to see you. And I had to overcome the fear of heights coming down those stairs. A little bit of the jitters, even a few stairs down and a few stairs up to the podium. I'm always envisioning maybe tripping or something like that, but it all worked out so far. But I do want to welcome you to IUPUI's campus today, for those of you who are visiting, and just set the tone for today's conversation. First, I want to publicly and in a heartfelt and honest way acknowledge the role of UCASE, and in particular of this conversation, for centering race in the middle of concerns for teacher equity, for what it means to make sure that all of our students have access to, as the rhetoric goes, high-quality teachers. But so often race is a side note of that conversation in more formal policy and practice dialogue. We're here to center race in the middle of that conversation. And as a white educator who is committed to first acknowledging and disrupting the role of white supremacy in maintaining the fact that most of our teachers are white like me, most of our teachers are female like me, it is very important that we do center not only a discussion of race, but also of the role of white supremacy in maintaining the systems that we currently have, of racial hierarchies in schools and society. As a principal investigator for an Equity Assistance Center, we are charged with, our project director, who mentioned this, is not able to be with us today, but typically she would be here. We are charged with supporting school districts and state departments of education in making sure that all students have equitable educational experiences, but with particular attention to race, gender, and national origin. Some of our more current work is, of course, around the distribution of high-quality teachers. But as we all know, in both subtle and very overt ways, students, and particularly students of color, are being told explicitly, and it's being signaled to them that there is little room for them. There is little room for them in the science, the STEM field. There's little room for them leading our students in classrooms. In many overt and subtle ways, our students of color are being taught their inferiority, while our white students are being taught their superiority and their place at the table. And we're here, again, to commit to disrupting those issues and those concerns that often block our students of color from accessing STEM education as well as positions in teaching in the STEM field. Again, I want to thank you for being here today. I look forward to continued conversation. And I do want to go ahead and introduce Dr. Wakefield as our moderator today. Dexter Wakefield is a graduate of Fort Valley State University in Georgia. He received his master's and doctorate degrees from Purdue University in curriculum and instruction. Dr. Wakefield also completed postdoctoral studies at Harvard University. Dr. Wakefield's area of research is the study of underrepresented populations in both STEM and agri-science, and he's published numerous articles in refereed journals, as well as nationally recognized creative works related to his area of research. Dr. Wakefield has served as chair, co-chair, or committee member of over 30 former doctoral and master's degree recipients. He has garnered over $500,000 in external grant support, primarily for teacher preparation projects. Thank you, Dr. Wakefield. And thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Torres. First of all, I would like to say it's a privilege to be here before you today to serve as your moderator for today's discussion. And I'm glad to hear the passion from the two presenters right before me, two individuals, and just to see the unity of these centers working together for the betterment of our student populations as well as our teachers. And it's really important that we keep this in the beginning of our forefront of our minds as we understand what our topic is today. Just 3%, a counter discussion on the recruitment and retention of African American teachers in STEM. We are here for two reasons. The first is to address the low number of African American teachers, which is just 3% in Indiana. I want you to take that in perspective as we talk about 3%. That's 3 in every 100, 30 in every 1,000, 300 in every 10,000, and 3,000 in every 100,000. See, when you see numbers like that, 3% can show you how dynamic it is when you're talking about the lack of teachers that are in STEM areas. Well, those are teachers in Indiana in general, but those numbers are even lower in the STEM teaching field. And our second reason for being here today is to discuss steps in increasing these numbers. With us today, to give their expertise on this issue is Superintendent Dr. Dena Cushenberry from Warren Township, Assistant Professor Dr. Julius Davis from Bowie State University, and Chancellor Marcus Robinson from Ed Powell. First, let me introduce to you Dr. Dena Cushenberry and tell you a little something about her background. She has been in public education for over 32 years. She started her career in MSD Warren Township in 1999. During that time, she has been an assistant professor at the middle school level and principal at the elementary level. Dr. Cushenberry opened Liberty Park Elementary School in 2002 to 2003. In 2008, Dr. Cushenberry moved to the central office where she served as the associate and deputy superintendent from 2008 through 2012. She was appointed superintendent in April of 2012 of that year. Dr. Cushenberry received the 1985 Teacher of the Year Award, 1998 YMCA Tribute to Women Award in Education, and the 1999 Phi Alpha Alpha Distinguished Public Service Award. In 2008, the elementary school at which Ms. Cushenberry was the principal received a National Blue Ribbon Award in Washington, D.C. In 2010, all elementary schools she supervised met the federal guidelines for No Child Left Behind, adequate yearly progress. That's something to be commended. In 2012, under her leadership, Warren Township schools were awarded $28.5 million from the United States Department of Education as a district race to the top finalists. In March of 2015, Dr. Cushenberry received a Distinguished Achievement Award in Education K-12 from the Center for Leadership Development. Dr. Cushenberry currently serves on several boards such as the James Hawley Community Health Center Advisory Board, the Indiana University Alumni Association Board, Vice President of the Eastside Rotary Club, and is a member of the District Administration Leadership Institute. This is Dr. Cushenberry. Another one of our presenters today is Dr. Julius Davis, who is an assistant professor of mathematics education in the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Professional Development in the College of Education at Bowie State University. Dr. Davis is a renowned expert in the field of mathematical education, moreover, as it pertains to Black students and teachers in urban schools. Dr. Davis's research and conceptualization of Black mathematics teachers has appeared in several scholarly publications. He has two main strands of research. He focuses on Black students and Black teachers in urban schools. His research on Black students focuses on race, racism, and policies that shape their schoolings in mathematics. To highlight his research of Black teachers in urban schools, Davis' research expands in mathematical teachers in urban areas to pre-service teachers and the history of Black mathematics teachers. He has currently conducted research of pre-service Black male teachers across disciplinary and grade level boundaries. He is also working on a historiography of Black mathematics teachers' academic and professional experiences and practices pre- and post-Brown versus Board of Education. Dr. Davis works with school districts to recruit middle and high school students into high schools and college teacher education programs. He also works in partnership with in-service teachers in Bowie State's professional development schools to provide teachers with professional learning opportunities. Davis has secured a number of grants to support pre-service and in-service teacher professional learning and development and cultural responsive teaching practices. This is Dr. Davis in December. And last but not least is Mr. Robinson, who is the Chancellor and Chief Executive Officer of Tindley Accelerated Schools here in Indianapolis. Mr. Robinson's professional experiences have made him uniquely qualified to lead this particular educational program. He spent several years in college admissions, first assisting, then leading campus-wide efforts to diversities, to selective liberal arts colleges in the Midwest. Realizing that he was often meeting students too late to help them prepare and get accepted to college, Mr. Robinson returned to the classroom as a teacher at the middle and high school levels in public and private institutions. Mr. Robinson has written curriculum, piloted innovative instructional programs, and worked diligently to improve the academic progress of students. In 2004, he launched the Charles A. Tindley Accelerated Schools. Under his leadership, Tindley Accelerated Schools have received both local and national awards for consistently producing high academic outcomes in a low-income setting. In addition to his work of Mr. Tindley, Mr. Robinson is a consultant on issues concerning school reform, school culture, and school administration. Mr. Robinson is a native of St. Louis, Missouri, and he holds a bachelor's degree from DePaul University, a master's degree from Butler University, and a master's degree from Columbia University. He is a member of the Urban Education Leaders Program at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York, where he is a doctorate candidate. He is a fellow of the Aspen Institute's Pahara Education Fellowship, and he was selected from a group of nationally charter school leaders to participate in the inaugural Charter Network Accelerator in New York City. Mr. Robinson. Okay, before we get started with our panel of questions, what I would like to do is, I'm just going to go over a few brief explanations and let you know how the panel will be held. So, today's panel will address several questions relating to the recruitment and retention of African American STEM teachers. I've asked each panelist to keep their responses to under 3 minutes, but each panelist may respond to one another's after being acknowledged by the moderator. After the panelist has addressed all the initial set of questions, the audience will have an opportunity to ask questions to the panel. So you'll be given time at the end to ask questions to the panel. We ask that the audience write down their questions on the note cards. If you were not provided with note cards, we do have some representatives here who can give you questions that you can write down on, and and then they can get them to the speakers at the end of the presentation. We will collect the cards during the question and answering session. Finally, the owners of Mo's A Place for States has graciously offered to support our efforts by hosting us following this panel discussion. For those who are able to go to Mo's, which is located at 15 Maryland Street, downtown, who will enjoy free appetizers, the opportunity to meet with the CTI scholars, discuss the important issues even further, and network with one another. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we will now present questions to our group of panelists. Once again, the title of our presentation today is Just 3%, a panel discussion on the recruitment and retention of African American teachers in STEM. So panelists, here's our first question. A recent large-scale longitudinal study of students in Florida reaffirmed prior research which has shown that students taught by a teacher of the same race evidence higher achievement than do students who are taught by teachers of another race. So the question that is posed to you, from your knowledge of education and your experience as an educator, how might we explain these findings? We're going to start. Well, I would like to leave it open.
Okay. I'll start. Okay. I would answer that question in two ways. One, I would first start off by saying that students, and before I start, I do have a little bit of a cold, so if you can't hear me, just let me know, and I'll speak up. But otherwise, I'll do the best I can. I think with regards to your question, I think that students need to see themselves in the curriculum, and as well as the people who present the curriculum to them, which is represented through their teachers. And I think that the results of that particular finding may suggest that, you know, from my research of African American math teachers, African American math teachers in some way introduce certain cultural phenomena into their classroom that are often very direct, and some of it is very unconscious. And some of those things play a role in how they transmit mathematical knowledge to students. And I would say that part of that transmission of cultural knowledge helps in some way for students to achieve. But the other part of how we respond to that relates to work that I do with regards to standardized testing. It pertains to how much stock you put into assessment results. From my own perspective and my own work, standardized testing is in many respects used to justify racial hierarchies, which was talked about in the opening of this panel session. In my own work, I talk about how if you look at the linkages in the history of achievement testing and intelligence testings, there's a very close link that was used to justify a hierarchy of races, whites on the top, blacks on the bottom. And if you look at most standardized testing, whether they're state, national, or international, that is usually the phenomenon that you see take place. And so in math education, although this work is often ignored, there's discussion of a racial hierarchy of mathematical ability that is often not discussed because of how we situate black and white students, that white students are the standard for mathematical knowledge. And even when they are not the highest performers, let's say for example, when Asian students are the highest performers, there's usually not a discussion of an achievement gap. Usually a discussion of an achievement gap occurs when black students or Hispanic students don't perform at the same level as white students. But when white students don't perform at the same level as Asian, there's usually something wrong with the instruction, there's usually something wrong with the curriculum, but there's always these deficit perspectives of students who are considered less than white students.
And just to piggyback on what Julius says, assessments, I think it's the curriculum. And so I am personally in favor of the Common Core standards because they are extremely rigorous and they do set a benchmark for all students. And with that, I think you're going to eventually get African American students that are more prepared for the science, technology, and math. Right now in Warren Township, I have probably less than 5% minorities teaching. So I can't really speak to if African American had an African American teacher, you know, how much better they would do. I can speak to, we expect all of our teachers to be quality teachers regardless of who they are, and our expectation is that they will teach all students to high levels. And when you have that expectation, I think people will rise to that occasion. And so that's how I look at that.
You put a really compelling question on the table, because honestly, then if black teachers are more effective with black students, then it begs the bigger question of how we recruit more and whether or not we can train non-black teachers to be just as effective, right? And so from my lens, this really is a question of pedagogy, that there's a certain level of connectivity or connection that content has to have with the real experience of the kids. Professor of science education at Columbia by the name of Chris Emden, who was initially talking about hip-hop pedagogy, but now talks about reality pedagogy. But whether you accept his methods or not, at some point it comes down to whether or not the content connects with the lived experience of the students. And so, in my estimation, when any teacher can make that happen, you get learning from kids, right? And so, too frequently we expect urban students to configure themselves to the pedagogical strategies of the teacher, as opposed to vice versa. And I will tell you, as the first black teacher in a predominantly white and affluent school, the expectation was I was supposed to take my blackness and stick it up on the shelf and figure out a way to connect with my white hockey players, with my white soccer players, whether or not that was a part of my lived experience or not. It was about their educational outcomes. And so there has to be the same expectation for folks who teach black children. They have a lived experience that is real, that is relevant to them, and if you can find a way to make that connection, then you get to the kind of outcomes that they're seeing in the research study before.
And that, the point that I heard, even through all three of you, that there was some form of cultural transmission that is perceived with having a teacher who is within the same race as the students in the population. How does that transfer, in your opinion, to the population? Or is there a difference? Because I know that was a part of the discussion. Is there a difference when there is a person of the same culture or background who are teaching the students?
Well, we do have a couple, but I will tell you that our African American teachers are extremely, not tough, but they really demand a higher level of expectation from their students. And so if every African American student had an African American teacher, I think that would be the case. But I still believe that, our expectations for all teachers to educate all students effectively every day is what we have to continuously look at. And we also talk to our teachers about making their teaching relevant to students, talk about their environments. How do you make sure that you are incorporating some of those lived experiences into that teaching so it is relevant and more important?
Jackie Jordan Irvine, who's one of my education sheroes, talks about this concept of other mother. To Dr. Cushenberry's point, this question of this balance between warmth and demand, these high expectations that are rooted in this abiding sense of care. And I think if you go back a generation ago, you would find both black inner city and black rural teachers who carried a cultural ethos relative to how their students were supposed to perform. I remember my teachers telling me, you're not going to embarrass me, and so you're going to learn this material. I'm not convinced, to Jawanza Kunjufu's point, that this far past at least institutional segregation, we find that same ethos. I have employed some young black teachers who don't carry any kind of cultural priority for their students. And kids see through that. When you don't have that same level of care, if you don't have that same sense of responsibility, if you're not prepared to make that same level of sacrifice to help me, to teach me, to learn, to help me learn, then it doesn't matter that you have brown skin, right? And so we have some middle class black teachers who never attended a predominantly black school, don't worship in a predominantly black church, never attended a predominantly black college, and therefore don't carry that same sense of racial connection with kids. As a matter of fact, in some cases, walk into the room and immediately lower their expectations when they're confronted by the majority of the black student population. And so they need as much pedagogical help and training and development as some of their middle-class white peers when it comes to confronting the needs of urban kids, especially in STEM.
Can everyone hear all the way to the back? Everything's pretty clear? Okay. All right, to follow up on that one, this most recent study examined achievement in reading and mathematics. Would you expect to see the same pattern in science and other subjects?
Well, again, because of standardized testing, we have really narrowed, and I will just say in most schools, the teaching to math and to English language arts, because those are the subjects that are assessed, and that's how we are kind of put out there in the media. So we want our families to enjoy and respect their communities and their schools. So we do what we need to make sure that our students are performing and are doing well. So.
One thing I want to add a few points. One is I think I would caution against looking at African American teachers as being monolithic. That we bring many multitude of different perspectives, as was shared here, to the classroom environment. The other piece I would say is that given the history of teaching to the test that many students, particularly in urban areas, have experienced, that there is going to be a significant time frame in which it will take for them to get over the lack of preparation that they've gotten in mathematics that will also translate to what occurs in science. Earlier, my colleague mentioned about Common Core, but what I think often is missing from the conversation of Common Core is the effects of teaching to the test and the lack of procedural and conceptual knowledge that students weren't able to gain as a result of years of this type of teaching. What does that mean in terms of transitioning to Common Core? And as we look at Common Core and we look at other standardized testing policies, where are the resources that accompany a standards-based curriculum and policy that wasn't there before Common Core, and then I would surmise that it's not there right now in many urban areas. And so we have to think about those kinds of things when we advocate for policies, because we have to look at the history of their educational experiences as well as what the current policies are requiring of students.
And to just piggyback on what Julius has said, we have prepared our community to say, we know our test scores are going to drop anywhere from 30 to 40%, and that's okay with us. That's okay, because we know our kids are learning math in a different way, learning how to conceptualize, learning how to collaborate and just build all those skills that they really need to just be well-rounded students. We know it's going to take time. And, we looked at 2 years ago when we wrote our Race to the Top, what does education look like in 2025? And so we started with 2025 and started to work our way back. And we've looked at those Common Core standards, and they are extremely rigorous. And when our students first had what we call a formative assessment on them, they cried. It was like, what is this? And we had kids at 17%, actually passing 17% of that very rigorous assessment. And so, we're going to be judged and tested, and we've had some benchmark and some readiness, and right now we're at 50 and 60%, but that's okay. We made some growth. And we're expecting, if we reach 50%, that's going to be good for us.
You raise a really good question about if this data is present in mathematics, is it similarly going to be situated in science? And it's an issue we struggle with. We spend a lot of time talking about science. Our goal has been, math. Our goal has been to try to make calculus the capstone math class for every high school student. And so there are consequences on down the line, and that's your reality. But what we found is, even when we do a really good job at teaching math, it doesn't necessarily dribble over into science, right? And so maybe the teaching of mathematics becomes transactional. This is how you work the problem. And science is more transformational. This is how you create something, or at least hypothesize about how something at least works. Maybe calculus has a deeper connection. So by the time they get to that point, we see some of that. And so to this question of teaching and learning, there have to be then science educators who are prepared to encourage a different level of critical thinking, analysis, and process for our kids in a way that, again, connects to the lived experience. So it's not so much just about how do I make the chemistry experiment hands-on, but how do I make the chemistry experiment connect to where you are appropriately situated, something that you deal with. And so, oh, God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so I would say the answer is a conditional yes, right? Because just because you get a black science teacher doesn't mean that they're going to be able to help kids make that leap, right? We are not training our very creative, artistic kids to apply that creativity and that artistry to the notion of proving something in science. And so STEM education or STEM teacher education has to contemplate what that means for kids to need to create. Not just how do you learn the laws of physics, how do you learn the periodic table in chemistry, but really how do you take all that stuff and make something or explain how something works.
Well, and I also think it's an access issue, because when I go back and I look, when I started a couple years ago, I went to our high school and I found that only 300 students were selected to take the PSAT. And so that means only 3% were African American, possibly. So recently this year, I've required that all of our sophomores and juniors take the PSAT so we can get more kids into those AP courses and more of that rigorous curriculum at the high school. So sometimes I think it's an access issue, and if you're not paying attention, then kids really don't have that opportunity.
Can I just add one other piece about the science piece? I think we also have to look at how students are exposed to science in elementary school, which in many cases is often lacking. And in that regard, they have less exposure to science than they do math. And I'm not sure how that will translate into what you were saying about will these configure on to science because of students' lack of exposure to scientific concepts, although they're engaged in them on an everyday process. And I also think that we have to take a look at those next generation science standards. And from my work of working with teachers in schools, one of the things that I'm finding in terms of professional development is that many teachers are not proficient in a way to teach for the demands of a Common Core or next generation science. But I would also even say that often what's lacking in the conversation about these particular standards-based instruction is culturally relevant practices. There isn't really a conversation about race. And so the things that we've experienced in the past kind of get caught up in what Michael Apple calls a slogan system. It kind of makes everybody feel that their needs are going to get met through the next generation science standards, through Common Core, when in fact some of the same inequities and issues that were there before are still there, they just call it a different name.
Or good work.
Or do you believe that access to Common Core will give students more, at least, access to a more rigorous curriculum or conversation? And I believe, from what I've seen, it has really changed what teachers do in the classroom. Because there was a time when we could actually tell you there were 10 strategies on how you could pass I-STEP. And we could almost guarantee you a 90% rate passing with those strategies. But now, kids really are struggling with text. Kids are really struggling with math. And, you know, I see that struggle beneficial to them because they're learning what they, you know, you're seeing a lot more aha moments versus, oh, I got this right.
I would answer what you said in one way, a couple ways. One, I don't know how it is done in Indiana, but in Maryland, with the connection of teacher evaluation.
Indiana, we've had standards, 5 different in the 5 last years. So.
No, I'm just saying in terms of like in Maryland it's connected to teacher evaluation. And I think when there are consequences for teachers in the way in which these policies lead, you are going to get a different type of framework. That's not necessarily mean it's going to be better, but teachers are going to do something different because they can get fired and so forth and so on. And we know that there are sidebar conversations that go on with administration that if test scores don't go up, then these are the repercussions. So I do think that that plays a role in some of what you will see with teachers in regards to these policies. But in terms of my own view of mathematics and science, for my work focuses on black children, so it, to me, should always have a liberatory focus. You should always see how you can use your knowledge of math and science to transform your own lived realities. And those things don't often get incorporated into a teacher's practice. I mean, in my own classrooms, I talk to teachers about culture responsive and social justice, teaching of math and science concepts. And if you don't have a social and political orientation, then those concepts go over your head and you don't see them as relevant. If you approach the teaching and learning of mathematics as you've been taught, which is that there's some who get it and some who don't, and that mathematics is culturally and politically neutral, then you're going to continue to feed into what structure that we currently have. But my position is that students need to see when things happen like gentrification in their community, they need to be able to see the mathematical connection to that. There are mathematical models that play roles in how gentrification takes place. When there are inordinate amounts of liquor stores in your community and you can go into another community and you don't see those types of things in that environment, students need to be able to see the mathematical knowledge that takes place with that. That doesn't happen often with those types of policies because teachers are so focused. This is what I often find when I work with teachers. They're concerned about what the test scores are going to be. That's their bottom line in regards to doing standards-based math or science work.
Well, and numbers, quantitative numbers are sometimes what it's about. You know, kids have to have a certain number to get into college. Kids have to be able to perform. So it still has to be our responsibility. But I certainly do believe what you're saying when it comes to, you know, making sure that kids have those lived experiences. You know, we see that with a lot of the signs for cigarettes in the communities, you know, the big billboards. So with advertisement, but you know, I still think there's a piece of this that we have to say, okay, it's going to take time for us to transform and get people to that. You just don't stop from a curriculum that is, you know, find the right answer to, you know, this big new way of teaching and learning for folks.
And I believe that everything that you all are saying would really lead into our next questions. Because we're talking a whole lot about cross-disciplinary practices in reference to STEM and how sciences can relate to technology, engineering, and mathematics. And all of this leading toward career preparedness for our future generation of students who will be in the fields when it comes to taking care of the generation before them. So our next question is the current curriculum in STEM teacher education meeting the needs of African American teachers and African American K through 12 students? If not, what changes would you suggest? Let me read that one more time. Is the current curriculum in STEM teacher education meeting the needs of African American teachers and African American K through 12 students? If not, what changes would you suggest?
Well, two things. I mean, first, the answer is no. It is inadequate, right? And so, in terms of changes, I think I'm having a hard time teasing apart STEM teacher ed from elementary teacher ed or English language arts teacher ed. To Dr. Davis' point, if you're gonna go work in the inner city with kids facing monumental challenges, to not have some kind of social justice focus to that work is a big misfire. And so I've taught both urban and suburban. And I will tell you that while both required a whole lot of work for me, when I worked with kids who were not living in severe poverty, they didn't need me to have a social justice orientation. They needed me to be a decent instructor, but they didn't need me to be a force for change and agency in their lives to try to inspire them to want to do more, be more change in the community. And so that has to, I think, be scaffolded into what we're doing in STEM teacher ed. The other thing is, if we're trying to get more black kids into teacher education, we need to be doing it earlier. Dr. Davis talked about this earlier. There are no pathways and pipelines to the STEM classroom, especially if we're looking at African American students. When I was in the admissions office, all of my students of color, whether they were black or Hispanic, were pre-money, pre-med, pre-law, pre-engineering. 99% of the kids that I recruited, whether it was Detroit or Atlanta whether it was New York City or Chicago, especially if those kids were second or third generation college students. Particularly if those kids had educators in their family who said to them, do anything to teach. Right? I did it so that you could have a decent life, but I need you to go on and make the money I didn't make. And so I think the difficulty with that is a lot of those kids then get to college, and because they were majoring in something for the wrong reason, fall off the path. And so to that end, I had engineering students I was advising at Purdue University as a fraternity advisor, who I'd say more than 50% of those guys came in as electrical engineering students and finished in business or sociology or psychology or something else. And so that pipeline to the STEM classroom, I mean, those guys would have been magnificent. Chemistry teachers, biology department heads, etc. But nobody laid out for them the pathway that says, here's where you can start, this is where you can be there in 3 to 5 years, this is what the career trajectory could be, which could be just as lucrative as a career in one of these pre-money areas that you've thought.
Well, when you talk about the curriculum, I would say just from the standpoint of K-12, we do have what we call STEAM at our elementary. Then we've added art rotation, so we do have that. And then in our 7, 8, we have Project Lead the Way, and that really seems to connect our kids. And then when they move on to high school, there's still Project Lead the Way with biomed. There's also robotics. We've had 2 of our teams go over to Germany. They've done such a great job. So the curriculum, it's there in pockets, but there's no policy. So until there's real policy with the Department of Education, you're going to always have these pockets. That's how
I think you've already gotten a sense of some of the things I suggest in terms of the STEM curriculum for African American students and African American teachers. I think that no, the current STEM focus isn't meeting those students' needs or teachers' needs. And it's interesting because I'm thinking about some work that I'm doing now with computer science. Although computer science is not my area, the content comes from some other colleagues. But in some of the schools that I work with, there are teachers who are teaching computer science that have no computer science background. And because they can make a student pass a test, then people are looking for more teachers like that. And that becomes the central focus, not the needs of the students. And I think that's the primary problem with the STEM curriculum. The focus is not on Black, Latino, or other groups. It's on the U.S. economy. It's on international warfare. It's on workforce. It's not on, there's no moral commitment to the STEM curriculum that we provide. If you look at most grants, if you look at most curriculum that goes on in school systems, if you're not showing how you're connecting those career academies or those programs to workforce or something that the government or somebody can benefit from, then you're probably not going to get that much support. It's interesting because I'm working with male teachers now, and one of the things that the students brought out is that if you're not in a math or science area, then you're probably not going to find much of a scholarship to focus on in terms of getting help with your assistant for school. And math and science has a utility to international warfare and the economy, and that's why there's so much money put into it from different avenues. And until we change the focus of the curriculum and we really think about what the goals are and who we want those goals to meet, we're not going to meet these students' needs or these teachers' needs.
Okay. All right. Question number 3. And I know that there are several people in here who really want to hear the answer to this next question. So, nationally, many schools of education are experiencing declining enrollment in teacher education programs. In what ways should our universities and K-12 schools change to become more attractive to potential African American mathematics and science teachers? What ways are our universities and K-12 schools should they change to become more attractive to potential African American mathematics and science teachers?
You know. Well, first of all, I don't even think it's at that level. I think it's a very basic notion that now African American students have access to other options. Prior to maybe 20 so years ago, most African American females were pushed into the teaching profession. And so now they're seeing that, you know, there's more than teaching that they can do. There are other avenues. So, you know, when I think about it, and teaching right now has been so devalued, and it's in this such a destabilized place where it's becoming more of a business than truly a public education system. So right now, this destabilization of vouchers, of, you know, choice, there are so many things that are happening in education right now, it's just not attractive. We have schools of education that are actually consolidating because they don't have enough students anymore. But the political tone surrounding education is just not good.
Yeah, I think to Dr. Davis' point about workforce development, right? Like, teacher education has become really responsive to market forces, and we have a lot of non-traditional programs that are in the offering. In this particular state, Dr. Davis, you don't even have to be school of education to license teachers anymore. We're willing to contemplate other organizations in that particular business. And so, in my estimation, the profession is under attack as a profession in ways in which other professions like nursing and accounting are not. And so I think teacher ed has to kind of really reclaim its place as sort of the marquee spot where the best training is happening, and really get reconnected to the service providers. Like, what do you really need from us in terms of the folks who are coming into your classrooms to teach? How do we work together to integrate that process? And how do we identify earlier these young people? Because one of the initiatives we have going right now is how do we recruit our alumni back into our classrooms? Which is not to knock any other kind of non-traditional teaching source, whether that's Teach for America or the New Teacher Project or whatever. Those are filling a role. But for us, if we're turning out these kids who consistently surpass state national average on SAT, they get into great colleges, they get degrees, then shame on us for allowing those kids to pursue ventures that don't necessarily make them feel good, that don't necessarily uplift their community. Why aren't we saying to those kids as they graduate from high school, there is a path to not only job security, but to a certain wealth, even wealth attainment, doing this particular work with folks that you care about. And so I go back to this notion of pathway. We have to light a path, especially for first generation college students, about why this is great. Take that math aptitude, take that science aptitude, and train to be a professional educator. As opposed to, I think, some of the stuff that we see right now where people are dabbling in education. We're going to do this for a little bit, then we'll move on. And so we try to demand from the get-go, you have to train to be a professional educator if you don't work for us. I can't say you're going to be in the profession 5 years from now, but you have to train like you're committed to a lifetime of doing this work. And so teacher ed, I think, has to reclaim this place where we are professional educators. We know how to do this better than other folks, but without that connection to real districts, going to Dr. Cushenberry and saying, let's train teachers together. I need your teachers to get involved in teaching these young folks I've recruited to be in this STEM pipeline.
But
Then it's not going to work.
I even think it's, and I hate to be simplistic, but it is very basic. It is hard to keep any teacher regardless of what career you are. I mean, we have teachers, when they come in and if they don't have the kind of support they need, and they're working hard, and with this new way of teaching and the demands, and they're saying, you know what, for $30,000, it's not worth it. And we have literally had kids leave and say, you know, I like teaching, but I need more money. I'm going to be an insurance person. I mean, how do you retain all teachers now in this political environment?
I think one thing about what my colleagues have said is that teaching is not seen as a very prestigious profession. It doesn't hold any high honor. One of our colleagues, Chancellor, says that we should recruit teachers like we should recruit athletes. But of course we know why we recruit athletes in the way in which we do. There's a lot of money behind athletes that isn't in the teaching profession. In the work that I do with regards to black male teachers and African American male teachers, I think we have to start earlier on in the middle and high school area. So like I was mentioning that there are career academies that are usually school districts have for high school, for teachers, for students to go into the different majors that they can do at the college level. I think that we have to start at the middle school level to get students interested in teaching so that they can enroll into those high school programs. I'm actually working on a program at the end of April where we're having a call to action to encourage some of the young men to take on a profession of teaching early on while they're still in middle and high school. I think the other piece that we have to do is we have to provide early opportunities for those we want to teach to get opportunities tutoring and teaching young people. What I found in research that I've done in the research literature is that students who had, or teachers who had early experiences tutoring and teaching have a prime opportunity or take more of an interest in going into teaching, regardless of the pay piece, but they have a certain attachment and commitment. And as before we got started with the panel, our colleagues, we were talking about just keeping teachers engaged throughout their trajectory of the program. And that's one of the things that we don't do very well. I know at my university, students don't come into the program until their junior year, but they need to be engaged from their freshman to the end of their years. And I think that leads me to another point, which is that we need a better partnership between school districts and universities. I just took maybe 6 males to a conference, and we presented on males' perspectives from a pre-service perspective on their teacher education program and what they bring to the profession. Every time I literally saw those students, somebody from a school district from different states across the nation were asking them about applying to their school districts because they want more male teachers. But the question I ask is, are you willing to invest in them before they get to your school district? Which is something that is most often not talked about. They want them there just to say that they have a diverse teaching population. And I am involved in accreditation, so I know how that works. So everybody, universities and school districts, have to show how they're working to diversify their teaching population. So to me, is there a genuine interest in having black male teachers or African American teachers in math and science in your school districts or in your teacher education programs, or do you just want them there for a number? And until we become very serious about that, those students are very perceptive. They know that there is no real investment in them. At my university, it's particularly a different perspective coming from an HBCU, and I'm sure this is at other places, over 70% of our students work. So to me, that partnership between universities and school districts are necessary because students need to be either employed in their after-school programs and some summer program to show that there's an investment in them early on. And not only that, the conversation that's often missing is that there'll be a better quality teacher through the type of preparation that you give them throughout these experiences. That's often missing from the conversation. Usually there's a rush to getting more of these diverse teachers in there without even a discussion of the quality of those teachers.
You know, that reminds me of something, when you talk about the workforce development, we have students working in Rolls-Royce and at Lily's, and they literally the businesses are coming to get our kids now, and they're saying, you know, we're going to have these kids and we're going to, you know, possibly hire them later. So why don't we look at something like what our businesses are doing? Because Lily's has our kids, Rolls-Royce has our kids, Dow Agri-Science is working with our kids. And so, you know, maybe universities need to, in some way, reach down to high school and say, you know, hi, why don't you come on in and get some credit here and this will help towards your certificate, well, it will help maybe towards some kind of credit, because that's what those places are
I
doing.
think what Dr. Davis is suggesting is we learn from corporate America relative to this whole question of how we do induction in the profession and what that means for retention, which is to say that the president of my board recruits corporations for partnerships for the business school for Purdue. The expectation then is those corporations are opening up their doors for paid experiences for Purdue business students. That being said, there is nothing stopping schools of education from taking the similar tack, which is to say, I am bringing through this cadre of science educators, and they are in need of real life summer experience, paid summer experiences. Because I find black students respond to that like they would taking an internship at Dow AgroSciences. And so I lost 2 great teachers from my alma mater because a colleague in New York offered them a summer experience after their junior year to come and teach in their summer school, where they rolled out the red carpet, they provided them with professional development, they paid them, they made sure they had an appropriate place to live, they gave them real experience with kids, and then they offered them a job at the end of the summer. And so they went back to school, African American students, with a job offer in hand, knowing that at the end of the day, I get to move to New York City. They had a $54,000 offer that I've already signed and I'm part of it. And so we have to, I think, as we professionalize and claim our state as education professionals, we got to move it to the next level. What does it mean to prime the pump relative to the job pool? We have to meet these kids young. We have to provide them with real career experiences as undergraduates while we're training them.
Okay. All right. With our last 20 minutes of this panel, we're going to ask that if there are any questions that were presented. I will try to answer as many as we can within the last 20 minutes. And as you can hear in the conversation, and what I'm getting out of the conversation, is that there is a need for financial assistance and others, and meeting these kids before they even make it to college. Because if you supply students with the needs that they're looking for at an earlier age and give them the educational tools that are necessary, then they can prepare a pathway to being successful in a career focus around the STEM-specific areas. And that's very important. So, what I'm going to do is ask a couple of the questions that you've asked to our panelists and give them an opportunity to answer them. I'm starting with the shortest one first. Okay. Panelists, what are your ideas around partnering with business, career changes, will help paid engineers as teachers? And who wrote that question so that maybe they can give me a better explanation of it?
I want to say I wrote it because you can't read my handwriting.
I didn't want to put you out there like that, but I don't have my glasses on.
What the question was supposed to ask is, when you talk about partnership, partnering with corporate America, who are paying, engineers and other applications pretty well, so that teachers, STEM teachers could come in sort of as adjuncts at school, so that students could see teachers of color at least come in to support them as teachers.
Well, with our robotics area, we do have an African American from Rolls Royce that comes in and works with our students. And so we do have access in some ways, but it's not consistent.
I take it a step further, Dr. Floyd, to say it's not just the partnerships with industry, but also the partnership with higher ed. Black engineering students from IUPUI, black engineering students from Purdue. How do we get them meaningfully engaged, not just in robotics, but if we're going to bring coding into high schools, what does that look like to get those students involved in that? If we're going to bring engineering meaningfully into the high some other type of curriculum, how do you forge those partnerships so that black kids see black engineers, not just who are in the industry, but who are training for those positions as well?
And I want to help piggyback on that question too, because it's very, very important that people are engaged. And I thank the panelists for talking about corporations and how they have interest in pursuing our students after graduation in the science field. I'm a recent past national president of the Minorities in Agriculture, Natural Resources, and Related Sciences, and we had a conference last week. We had over 86 businesses there, corporations, Dow AgriSciences, Pioneer, Farina, any of the big names, Kraft, anything you can name, and they came to these career fairs and they told us, I have 120 job offers right now that we're saving for your students. And this is Pioneer. 120 job offers because we are looking for minority hires. And they specifically came to us with that. So if you for the talent pipeline, we need to reach these students at an earlier age and let them know that these companies are looking for these hires because they have quotas that they need to meet too, even though we don't like to use that word, but they receive additional dollars based on their diversified efforts when it comes to career options in STEM.
But you know, I guess the other thing too is K-12 has to respond to the curricular need that you're putting on the table, right? Which is to say, if kids are going to be ready for agricultural science or any other science, that they have to come to college with a background that allows them to have access to that coursework. And so currently, kids don't even have to take any serious lab science to get a high school diploma. I thought we were getting kids ready for engineering, so we make them take calculus. Certainly they can go be engineers. And then the engineering school at Purdue told us, well, you know, we're concerned about your chemistry instruction because we start in chapter 3, we don't start in chapter 1. We start with nuclear chemistry, we don't start with beginning chemistry. And so you need to retool your program if what you want is for your kids to have access. Okay, who's having that conversation with K-12 about how much science we should be putting in front of students? And so even as we talk about recruiting more teachers of color, until we say, okay, I'm going to change what it means to get this diploma. And that diploma is going to have with it not just a satisfactory English language arts preparation, not just a satisfactory mathematics preparation, but I'm going to intentionally put lab science in front of these kids. Then it doesn't matter, right? We're never going to have the demand in industry that teacher ed should respond to, right? So at some point, then, you know, Washington Township has to say, now that we've added all of these sections of chemistry and physics, because we're not requiring it of all of our students, and not just the kids who would select it, all right, teacher ed, I need more black teachers in chemistry and physics, because now I have, you know, greater distribution of kids that I have to accommodate. So at some point, we have to meaningfully push K-12 to change what it's doing and stop letting black kids get out of high school without having confronted lab science for real. Because then they get to the college campus with these great ambitions. I want to be a doctor. Help me, show me the pathway to being a doctor. Well, tell me about what you took. I took some biology when I was a freshman, and you know, I had earth space science, and then I didn't take science junior year because I was playing football and baseball. I mean, at some point, we have to get beyond that and compel a different kind of science preparation for our kids, which I think will make K-12 speak to teacher ed in a different way.
Okay. All right, next question. Recent studies have emerged finding that black teachers are leaving the teaching field in large numbers, and these reasons differ from those of white teachers. Much of this is due to institutionalized racism. What are ways that school leaders could counter racism so that black students and black teachers are not pushed out of schools?
I think it's truly making sure that there's some culturally relevant practices in place. And it's
Can everyone hear? No. Okay.
Okay, it's making sure that culturally relevant practices are in place and having supports for those teachers in some form. You know, I need support for myself sometime because, you know, I was like one of, you know, you have the distinction of being the only black, and in 2015 you still struggle with that because we should be past that, you know, the only black to open a school, the only black to be superintendent, the only, you know, so you can just imagine what your students and your teachers are going through. So I think just constantly being aware and providing cultural relevant practices and, you know, perspectives and, you know, lens, and so we constantly kind of talk about that.
From one of the school districts in which I know of, they, and work with on some things, they have started a same race, same gender peer mentoring to be able to discuss some of the same things that question asked about, to be able to discuss race and racism in a way that you don't often get to discuss in a public forum like this with somebody that you kind of built the trust with. I would say that that would be one possible solution in addition to the culturally responsive practices. But I think oftentimes when people think about culturally responsible social justice practices, they only think that applies to quote-unquote minority groups or underserved groups, but it is really a way to expand others to cultures that they aren't accustomed to interacting with or have very limited experiences with. One of the things that struck me when I went to Africa was students who went to Africa to interact with a different culture but had never interacted with people who are different from them in their own country or their own state. And so I think that we have to really think about the issues of race that are going on in our particular school districts and be willing to talk about them seriously and address them seriously. Most oftentimes, they're just swept under the rug and people don't want to address them because of their uncomfort in dealing with such critical issues. I think until we become more open as a profession to really discuss students' experiences with racism because they experience them with teachers, and teachers' experiences with racism with parents and students and other colleagues, we won't be able to really get at addressing issues of racism. I think that with regards to racism, teachers start to feel isolated when they continuously get exposed to these racial microaggressions, as some people call them, and no one addresses those issues. And so I think that we have to become more serious about addressing them.
I mean, if racism is real for kids, it's definitely real for the few black teachers that you get into the classroom, who, for the most part, are reporting to white administrators, who, to some extent, feel like black teachers have been pushed upon them as opposed to recruited by that particular administrator to work in that particular building, and without any cultural interpreters to kind of say, well, this really is about your performance. That's really just because that person doesn't like black people. It's hard for those folks to discern what is about me being a young teacher and what is just about this person's messed up mentality, right? And so, as professional educators, you have to demystify this question of teaching. It has to become more science than it is art. As long as we allow teaching to be spooky, great teachers are born, they're not made, right? Then you can never really kind of codify this is what great teaching looks like. And there has to be greater transparency. When I start teaching, nobody observed us. You know what I mean? Nobody came to, unless we were beating the kids or cussing them out. I mean, nobody really was paying attention to what was happening on a daily basis in the classroom. So the folks that I started teaching with felt like our classroom was our domain. And so advancement wasn't about the fact that I'm a good teacher. Advancement was about nepotism or patronage or networking, whatever you want to call it. Your principal likes you or they don't like you, and you advance, right? And so at some point we had to like open the doors up. I love this notion of Marion and these professional development schools where you're training pre-service teachers alongside of teachers that you're growing and getting better, because it means that we're meaningfully walking into somebody's classroom, we're putting their junk on the table, good is good, bad is bad, and we all want to kind of grow and develop. But most folks are not like that. We got cameras and microphones in our classrooms, which people think is a little spooky. But there is nothing like taking a young teacher and saying, this is what's killing you in your classroom. Notice that every time you turn your back and start writing on this whiteboard, these kids go nuts. This little girl throws something every time you turn your back. So let's talk about how you're going to manage this class. But let's talk about the level of rigor that starts here and it goes there, right? And so there has to be transparency and clear delineation about what good teaching looks like and doesn't look like. And you have to have enough black administrators who are willing to come to the table and say, I'm taking this brother under my wing. I'm going to help him grow and develop. I'm going to tell him the truth about when he's wrong, when he's underplaying, when he's undermanaged. And I'm going to defend him when you just don't like him because you don't like the way he looks, or you don't like his name, or you don't like that occasionally he slips into vernacular in an effort to connect with his kids. And a lot of black teachers, young black teachers, just don't have it. When you run into that white administrator who does not like you, it's just you and her.
All right, we have enough time for one more question, so I'm going to read that question. And the question is, the African children are possibly not motivated to seek jobs in higher education fields because of hip hop and other types of income earning avenues. Is this a problem of concern?
I think the death grip that hip hop has on some of our youth is, and it should be, of a major concern. I think the popularization of it has a lot of people clinging to it and thinking that it's the most appropriate thing to do for our children because they listen to the music without even really thinking about the repercussions and the consequences of them identifying with some of the most damaging and degrading cultural images of groups of people. It's interesting that one of my colleagues who talks about the fact that the nature of hip hop, the most damaging parts, gangs, drugs, and misogyny gets associated with black children, but the most fundamental parts of the art form gets to be enjoyed by other groups, whites. I mean, I was surprised the other day to see a hip hop dance competition, and it was primarily white students. And so the degrading parts of hip hop that often gets associated with the black community is totally devoid of those contexts. And I think that we have to be very careful how we use hip hop to educate our youth.
I don't know that it's keeping them out of higher ed though. I mean, their colleges teaching classes on hip hop. Harvard, right? And so I think ultimately it's about who helps black students identify themselves as potential college professors. And without that professor who says, I see something in you that could be full professor, it could be dean, it could be president of the college. I mean, especially if you're first generation college student, nobody's ever called your name and said professor. How do you see that in yourself? People have called you lawyer perhaps. People have said you're really good in math, you should think about being an engineer. But when you get to campus, who brings you under their wing and says, I want to get you to the University of Iowa because they've got the best program in this, and then I want you teaching at one of these top tier institutions. Somebody's got to show you that in your own life. It doesn't matter what music you listen to or what your lifestyle is, until people help you to incorporate that as a part of your identity. You could be a hip hop professor. But nobody, I think, is bringing folks down that line, at least not in any large numbers, at least not in any large scale.
They are, and it's unfortunate, I think. It's a big, large movement going on with hip-hop in the academy and in K-12 settings that I think is not being critically examined in a way because of the popularity. And I think that we have to be careful of that.
No, I'm not suggesting that the right thing to do is to teach kids how to incorporate the lifestyle in the academy. My point is, they already incorporate that as a lived experience. What I'm saying is, when it comes to the academy, we're not showing them their place in the academy. You know what I'm saying? You have to have, I think, counter narratives, right? Hip hop is telling you your life is this, and I'm telling you your life is that, right? And so we have to have more meaningful academic mentors at the higher ed level who are helping to identify all of those black math professors, black science professors that are going to teach these STEM teachers that we're trying to bring.
You know, the one thing I want to say, the hip hop to me is probably impacting students, but social media is impacting our African American students so much more because they don't really understand what they're putting out there. They really don't they have no idea of their footprint. And so even if, that to me is a lot more concerning than what students are putting out there. The music is bad. It's really tough. Social media.
Okay. I'm going to allow one more question that I just received a second ago. Do we have enough time for that one, Joe Moore? Okay. And that question is, what is the path of least resistance in introducing corporate and future real needs to K through 12 curriculum? And I think you touched on that a little bit. What is the path of least resistance in introducing corporate and future real needs to the K through 12 curriculum? And we're going to finish it out with that question there.
I think possibly the path of least resistance would be just making sure that you invite those partners in to share with students the possibilities, providing materials, resources of what is possible. So I think that's a start.
Is your question, how do you change K-12 science? What's the path to least resistance to getting those changes?
I'm thinking more, as I read this question, how can the corporate benefit if the curriculum, as far as career opportunities, when we know the needs of corporate America and the future needs, how can we look at the K-12 curriculum and make sure that we are matching corporate with the educational preparation? I'm hoping that's the right.
Well, that's right.
That's it?
That's correct.
Okay.
We look at competencies that business say students will need when they actually are on the job. So we have some students in, like I said, Rose, Dow, Lily, that have a set of competencies that business says in order to be successful here, you will need to demonstrate this. And then kids will demonstrate it through either a portfolio, through on-work experience, or so there are a variety of ways. There might be a peer audience, and then the students perform or give their exhibit in front of the business. So in that way, I'm hoping that's what you're kind of talking about. But
I really got the question, but Mr. Robinson, is that correct?
Yes.
With what you were speaking. You know, how do you take that craft, that really, that Dow agriculture, and say, okay, these are the things that we see happening, where things are moving to.
Sure.
We know that we're going to have a need, that the world is going to have this need. We know that, you know, there's going to be food shortages, there's going to be water shortages, things of that nature off the West Coast. We're going to have a need for these types of individuals. How do you introduce those needs into the curriculum of K through 12? If it's more science, if it's a particular science, if it's a particular math, it's a broad question, but
it's actually a really good question, and it's not as difficult as you might think, because K-12 educators are notorious followers. Like, we love something that somebody else has done. We'll come to your training and we want you to binder the whole nine. So really, if you can get it launched, a lot of people will follow after you get it launched. The question is, how do you position it so that it's effective, right? And so the concern for us became, like, we could get kids into decent colleges and universities, and then kids who were pre-science become sociology majors. Not sociology majors, we love them too. But the question became then, why are we not more meaningfully projecting kids into some of the careers that you're talking about? And so we opened up a conversation with higher ed to say, what's the barrier here? Tell me why your numbers are falling and what we can do to pipeline more meaningfully to something that is about the future, whether that is computer programming or it's engineering, etc. And so they've given us some some indications about things that we can do to transform what it is that we're doing to get kids to that. Simultaneously, though, we started looking at a local engineering firm. We're going to put engineering in the high school. Let's talk to a local engineering firm, not just about this question of internships, which is critical, but what about this question of like mentoring and role modeling? How do we help kids to meaningfully even understand that? And so we partner with a local company that does construction engineering, they do some energy engineering, they own a chemical plant in Belgium. And so we're working with them to kind of say, how do we make this real world for these kids? But the place where we were falling down from a K-12 perspective, because introducing them to is one thing, is do they have the solid preparation to access some of these programs at the collegiate level? Are we pushing them hard enough in high school? And what we were finding is, at least in the science category, we weren't pushing nearly as hard as we needed to push. And so, but we didn't learn that because we sat around and had a committee. We learned that because we reached out to higher ed, we reached out to industry, and we said, how do we need to retool it? That's the hard part, right? Writing curriculum in a way that provides access to kids, i.e. we're going to require chemistry and biology and physics, might also limit some kids as well, right? So what happens to the kid who doesn't want to take all that science that you're not requiring? And so I think the hurdle will become getting school boards to get on board with this notion of more science for kids. Getting the State Department of Education to sign off and say, you know what, the science test that we make you take, but we don't care whether or not kids pass it, now it has teeth. And so you really have to teach these science skills because we think it's important. And so those policy issues, I think, are a little bit harder. But getting schools to do it is as easy as finding one district. If Wayne Township comes up with dynamic science and they're getting poor kids to get through 3 or 4 years of lab science, I bet you $1 to $10, Piper's gonna go right over to Wayne and say, show us how you're doing it. You got black kids doing 4 years of lab science, we'll sign us up. We want that training. But somebody's gotta go first.
Okay, you heard a lot of good points up here today, and I know it has your mind twirling when it comes to our topic for today in reference to African Americans in STEM. So I would like to call up to the table right now Dr. Muthigi, who will bring us with our closing remarks and acknowledge our speakers today.
And let's thank our panelists. So I'm very appreciative, and I enjoyed hearing your different perspectives. And it's really nice to see how someone who sits differently professionally takes a different cut on a problem. So we all looking at the same elephant. Some of us looking at the front. Some of us having help us have to look at the hind end. Some of us look at it from the side. But we leave with a better sense of this larger problem when we see it from a diversity of perspective. So I want to thank you all. I also want to once again thank our partners, SAS, and the young lady over here in their shirts. Also, CUNE, Great Lakes Equity Center, and of course, UPUI, which is the organization. And finally, if you're like me, you've been working all day and you're hungry, so we really want to thank Moe's Steakhouse. For those who are going to go to Moe's, and I encourage you to all go, they're offering free appetizers. You go in, let them know that you are with the panel discussion, and they've set aside a room for us, and we'll have a very informal reception. It'll be a good opportunity to talk more with our panelists and with each other. There's many people who address this issue in this room from our own various perspectives. So if you want to know more about the Carver Teaching Initiative, that's the scholarship that Brianna and Maritza received. And if you're interested in supporting future CTI scholars, please see Kaisha, who's at the IUPUI table just as you leave. She has a sign-up sheet, and you can give us your name and address, and I can send you more information, and I can solicit you for support. Thank you. See you at the reception.